No one at the remote U.S. Army base in southern Afghanistan noticed the cleaning lady. Forward operating base Ridgeline sat in the middle of a brutal, endless desert, a fortress of concrete barriers, watchtowers, and dust-choked air. Helicopters came and went like restless ghosts. Convoys rolled out at dawn and returned at dusk, sometimes lighter than they left. And through it all, Elena Ramirez moved quietly with a mop and a gray plastic bucket. She arrived before sunrise every day, when the sky was still a deep violet and the air briefly cool. The soldiers were either asleep or finishing night watch. The base felt different at that hour, less hardened, less guarded. Just tired men and women carrying too much. Elena kept her eyes down, her steps soft. That was how you stayed invisible. Her job was simple: clean the operations room, wipe down briefing tables, empty trash bins, dust off map boards, and sanitize whatever the desert had managed to invade overnight. Sand found its way into everything: keyboards, weapon racks, coffee cups, even classified folders. She worked methodically. But she listened. She always listened. Inside the operations room, conversations floated freely because no one considered her a security risk. She was just contracted support staff, a civilian, background noise. Root coppers compromised again. Intel says they're adapting faster than we expected. IED pattern doesn't make sense. She wiped the whiteboard slowly, memorizing the red X's drawn across printed satellite images. Each X marked an ambush. Each circle meant casualties. She never stared too long, never asked questions. But she remembered everything. The soldiers didn't know that Elena had once sat in rooms far more advanced than this one, rooms without sand or sweat, filled with glowing digital maps and analysts speaking in calm, calculated tones. Years ago, she had studied patterns of insurgent movements for the Defense Intelligence Agency. She had predicted routes, triangulated threats, and identified kill zones before they happened. Until the day she didn't. The memory pressed against her chest as she wrung out her mop. A convoy she had cleared, a route she had marked low probability. 12 soldiers injured, 3 never came home. She had resigned within weeks. Since then she had chosen quiet jobs, invisible jobs, jobs where no one asked her to predict who might die. But war had a way of following people. That afternoon, the base buzzed with unusual tension. A supply convoy was scheduled for departure at 600 the next morning, 5 armored vehicles carrying medical equipment and replacement communication gear. Routine, necessary, dangerous. Elena entered the operations room after a briefing had just ended. The chairs were still warm. The scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air. The main strategy board stood against the wall, a large printed topographic map covered in colored markings. Red X's, blue arrows, black dotted lines. She began wiping the metal frame absent-mindedly. Then she noticed something. 3 red X's from the past month formed a loose arc across the eastern corridor. Another 2 marked strikes along a southern bend. The spacing wasn't random. Her hand slowed. Most insurgent ambushes were opportunistic, reactionary, chaotic. These weren't. They were staggered, calculated. She leaned slightly closer, careful not to smudge anything important. Her pulse quickened. The angles between the ambush sites created a narrowing funnel toward a higher elevation route, a route currently marked with a blue arrow for tomorrow's convoy. Black Ridge Pass. Her throat tightened. The pattern suggested progressive testing, probing outer routes, adjusting, tightening the strike zone. If the enemy had been studying convoy timings and refining positions, the next logical choke point would be the narrow canyon stretch at Black Ridge. She stepped back immediately. No, she was projecting, overthinking, seeing ghosts in dust. She grabbed a cloth and began wiping the lower edge of the board to steady her breathing. A young lieutenant re-entered the room unexpectedly. Elena lowered her gaze instantly. "Morning," he muttered absently, grabbing a folder from the table. She nodded softly, saying nothing. When he left, her eyes drifted back to the map. There was one more detail. Every previous ambush had occurred within 48 hours of a communication equipment transfer. She had overheard that detail earlier that week. Replacement radio components were high-value targets. Disabling them weakened patrol coordination. Tomorrow's convoy carried new communication arrays. Her chest felt tight now. She remembered the way analysts used to say it: when patterns repeat, people die. Outside, the distant thud of artillery practice rolled across the desert. The sound vibrated through the thin walls. Alina's hands began to tremble slightly. She told herself it wasn't her responsibility anymore. She was not an analyst. She was not cleared for operational input. If she interfered, they could remove her contract. Worse, they could accuse her of accessing information she shouldn't be studying. But if she said nothing... She imagined armored trucks entering the canyon at dawn, the sharp crack of detonations, smoke swallowing steel, soldiers scrambling under gunfire from elevated rock positions. She had seen the aftermath of those scenarios before, in reports, in photos, in silence-filled rooms where families were notified. The sun dipped lower, casting long orange shadows through the small window. Most of the base had shifted into evening rhythm. Laughter from the mess hall drifted faintly across the yard. Life continuing unaware. Alina placed her cleaning cloth down carefully on the table. She studied the map one final time. The funnel shape was unmistakable now. The elevation markers, the blind curves, the layered rock outcrops ideal for concealed explosives and secondary shooters. Black Ridge Pass wasn't just a possibility. It was perfect. Her breathing steadied. For years, she had tried to bury this part of herself, the part that saw patterns others missed, the part that carried unbearable responsibility. But invisibility came with its own guilt. She picked up her bucket and rolled it toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. The operations office where the colonel worked was down the hall, lights still on. She paused outside the door. Voices murmured inside, planning details for the 600 departure. Her hand hovered near the frame. If she walked away now, no one would question it. Tomorrow would unfold without her involvement. She would continue mopping floors, continue pretending she couldn't see what was coming. Or she could step inside and risk everything. Alina Ramirez closed her eyes briefly. Then she knocked. The door clicked softly as Alina Ramirez entered the colonel's office. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, sweat, and the faint acrid tang of electronics. Maps littered the table, laptops hummed, and half-empty cups marked the passage of long hours. The colonel looked up, frowning at her sudden appearance. "You again?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. His voice carried a mix of mild irritation and curiosity. "You finished cleaning?" "Yes, sir," Alina replied quietly, though her eyes didn't leave the map. She stepped closer, hands folded, heart hammering. I need to show you something." A chuckle escaped from one of the lieutenants. "She's a cleaner," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Unless she's found a dust bunny hiding IEDs, I don't think." Alina ignored him. She moved to the map and traced her finger along the series of red X's that marked previous ambushes. Each one was like a pulse in a rhythm only she could hear. She tapped lightly at the latest clusters, highlighting the arcs that funneled toward the canyon marked for the convoy tomorrow. "The attacks," she said carefully, "they're following a pattern. It's deliberate, not random." The room went silent. The lieutenant's smirk faltered. Even the colonel leaned forward. "Go on," he said. She took a deep breath. "Look at these points. The spacing, the timing, they're probing, testing. Each ambush is slightly farther along the route, tightening the funnel. And the next one, if this pattern holds, is going to happen at Black Ridge Pass." The colonel rubbed his chin, scanning her hand gestures and the map with narrowed eyes. "Black Ridge," he murmured, almost to himself. "Yes, sir. And not just that. Every previous attack occurred within 48 hours of equipment being replaced or repaired: radios, comms devices, essential gear. Tomorrow's convoy is carrying a fresh load of communication arrays." The room went cold. Silence stretched like a taut wire. Every soldier present felt it. The colonel's jaw tightened. Are you telling me we're walking into an ambush? I think so, sir, Alina said softly. If I'm wrong, we're safe. If I'm right, her words caught, but she didn't need to finish. The implication hung heavy in the air. The lieutenant shook his head, voice low. She's a cleaner. She's not even supposed to know any of this. The colonel's eyes stayed fixed on the map. He asked, almost rhetorically, and why should I believe you? Alina swallowed, gripping the edge of the table. Because I've seen this before. I analyze patterns. I was an intelligence analyst. I know what to look for. I know the signs. And Black Ridge fits the sequence perfectly. A murmur ran through the room. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably. She could feel the tension rise like heat from the desert floor. Some of them still didn't believe her. Most were silent, unsure how to respond to a woman who had been invisible to them moments ago, now speaking with uncanny confidence about life and death matters. The colonel stood and walked around the table, examining her closely. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he tapped the map, following her finger. If you're right, he said slowly, we need confirmation. Drone feed, satellite images, recon reports. I want everything on Black Ridge within the hour. Alina nodded. Relief hit, but it was fleeting. Time was already slipping through her fingers. She moved toward the command terminal. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, cross-referencing reports and drone data. A few minutes later, she pointed to a faint disturbance visible on one of the satellite images. Tiny clusters of movement along the ridges, mounds of disturbed earth, shadows that didn't belong. The lieutenant who had laughed earlier leaned in, eyebrows raised. Holy, he whispered. That's exactly where she said it would be. Alina's lips tightened into a thin line. It doesn't stop there, she said. The insurgents are calculating our responses. Every adjustment we've made, they've accounted for. If we move the convoy the same way tomorrow, they'll adapt. They're learning from us. The colonel's gaze sharpened. So we need a new plan, now and fast. Yes, sir, she said, taking a deep breath. And if I may, there's a secondary path through the canyon. It's narrow, but it's less predictable. If you reroute the convoy and stagger the timing, we can minimize exposure. He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. The room was tense, alive with electricity, like soldiers on the edge of an invisible cliff. Get me reconnaissance, he ordered. Double-check Black Ridge, and I want all units briefed by 500. Alina stepped back, quietly observing as they scrambled into action. Soldiers she had mopped past 1,000 times now treated her with something close to respect, or maybe disbelief. She stayed silent. She had said her piece. Now the real work would be done by the men and women on the ground. Later, as she returned to her cleaning duties, she glanced back at the map. Her stomach churned. Patterns like these didn't just exist on paper. They existed in real life. And the canyon, beautiful and deadly, would either confirm her prediction or expose her worst fear, that she had missed something crucial. She moved among the desks again, dusting off keyboards and folding chairs. Her eyes kept darting to the map. Every passing second felt longer, heavier, filled with the unspoken knowledge of what might happen if she were wrong. Night fell over the base. The desert winds rattled the barriers and distant thunder rolled across the mountains. Soldiers went to rest. Helicopters landed and lifted off like restless predators. Alina finished her mop and placed it gently against the wall. But she did not sleep. She could not. She returned once more to the operations room, crouched by the table, tracing the red X's with her fingers. The pattern was unrelenting. The arcs, the elevation changes, the timing, everything fit. Black Ridge Pass was a trap. She knew it. And tomorrow, unless someone listened, soldiers would walk straight into it. Alina Ramirez was just a cleaner, but she had seen what no one else had. And for the first time in years, she felt the old instincts roaring back, instincts that might save lives. Her hands trembled. She wiped a line on the map absent-mindedly. Dust danced in the moonlight streaming through the window. Tomorrow the world might change. And she, invisible until now, might be the only one who could make it right. Alina's knock echoed softly against the metal door of the operations room. The colonel, a tall man with graying temples and a face that had seen too many conflicts, looked up from a stack of folders. A few officers and soldiers glanced over, eyebrows raised, curiosity sparking in the stale, recycled air of the room. "Come in," the colonel said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. She stepped inside, bucket in hand, the familiar click of the mop handle punctuating the quiet. The soldiers barely paid attention. She was supposed to be invisible. She lowered her gaze nervously and gestured toward the large map on the wall. "They're going to hit Black Ridge Pass tomorrow," she said softly. A ripple of laughter traveled through the room. The colonel raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "I said the convoy, it's walking straight into an ambush. Black Ridge Pass," she repeated, pointing to the marked route. Her finger traced the narrow canyon corridor, the small red X's along the map emphasizing the danger. The laughter grew. A young lieutenant shook his head, smirking. "And you are?" "Cleaning staff," Alina admitted, voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "I just noticed the pattern." A sergeant snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Patterns? We deal with insurgents, not crossword puzzles." Alina ignored the chuckle. She drew a deep breath and continued. "The previous ambushes weren't random. Look at the spacing. They're refining their positions, timing their attacks. This canyon, it's ideal for explosives and secondary shooters. If the convoy follows this route, they'll be sitting targets within 20 minutes of entry." The room fell quiet for the first time since she entered. Even the colonel leaned forward, fingers steepled. One of the intelligence officers, Lieutenant Harper, pulled up the drone feed on the monitor. "Let's see what we have," he muttered, skeptical but curious. Alina's eyes never left the map. She pointed again, outlining the curve of the canyon, the blind ridges, the dry riverbed. "They've planted devices along the sides. You'll have limited visibility. Any armored vehicle slowed by debris becomes a target for small arms fire. They'll hit the center of the convoy first, then move to flank positions. Timing is precise. They've studied it." Lieutenant Harper squinted at the feed. Faint shadows shifted across the rocky terrain. He froze. "Wait, pause, zoom in." Alina's heart thumped. The drone camera hovered over the canyon. Small figures moved among the rocks, dark silhouettes blending with the dusty brown earth. A faint glint suggested the digging of earth or the placement of objects. The laughter that had filled the room dissipated. Even the young lieutenant who had mocked her turned pale. The colonel's face hardened, jaw tightening. "Where did you get this information?" he asked, voice sharp. I observed the patterns from previous incidents, and timing from the communications logs," she admitted cautiously. I'm not cleared for operations. I just clean." "You just clean?" The colonel's eyes narrowed, cutting through the room like a blade. "You've analyzed insurgent tactics." She nodded. "I used to, years ago. I left after a mission went wrong. I didn't want to come back, but the pattern, it's too clear. The convoy, if it goes through tomorrow without adjusting, people will die." Silence followed, thick as desert dust. Then the colonel spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You're saying it's a trap?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was firm now. "Black Ridge Pass. Ambush imminent. Timing aligns with previous attacks. This is exactly how they work, testing routes, probing defenses, refining positions. They won't make a mistake. If the convoy leaves as scheduled, it's over before it even begins." The colonel rubbed his temples and gestured for the intelligence team to review the feed. Fingers flew across keyboards, analysts murmured to each other, and phones rang with urgent reports. Alina stood near the map, silent now, watching as disbelief shifted to concern, and concern shifted to grim understanding. Finally, the colonel looked up. "All right," he said, voice low, carrying authority that silenced the room. "We'll reroute the convoy. Harper, check the feed again. Send reconnaissance teams to Black Ridge Pass. Drone full surveillance. I want eyes on every possible ambush point. And Alina," he hesitated, "you stay here. We'll need you for pattern analysis. Informal, but we'll use your insight." Her stomach twisted, the recognition that she had never sought this, and yet had been pulled back into the center of a battlefield she had once fled, filled her with a tense, strange relief. She nodded. Hours passed as preparations began. Drone cameras hovered over the canyon, capturing every movement. Soldiers reviewed escape routes. Communications teams scrambled to update convoy schedules. Alina's eyes were sharp, scanning every angle, every shadow. Then from the live feed, a small movement caught her eye. A figure crouched near the edge of a ridge, placing something in the sand. She squinted. It looked like an explosive device. Another figure appeared behind cover, then another. "Colonel," she said, pointing to the screen. "They're planting explosives. This is happening now." The colonel's face went pale. "Confirm coordinates." Alina traced the points carefully. Exact locations matched the pattern. Every previous ambush site was used as a guide. They're targeting tomorrow's convoy. The colonel leaned back, voice low and sharp. "God help them if they're wrong." Alina swallowed hard. She had predicted ambushes before. But this time the stakes were immediate. Tomorrow, not months in a file. Lives were counted in hours. As night fell over the base, the desert wind carried dust and whispers. Soldiers moved cautiously, checking gear, revising plans. And Alina, once invisible, now found herself at the center of attention, her observations suddenly carrying the weight of life and death. She stared at the map one last time before retreating to the corner of the operations room, mop forgotten. Her heart thumped. Tomorrow would prove if she was right, or if being seen was a mistake she could never take back. Outside, the wind moaned through the barbed wire, carrying with it the quiet echo of an ambush waiting in the shadows, unseen, but meticulously prepared. And Alina knew she could not ignore it, not this time. The soldiers who had laughed at her earlier had gone quiet. They were listening now. And tomorrow, Black Ridge Pass would test every prediction she had made. The first light of dawn crept over forward operating base ridgeline, painting the desert a pale, unforgiving gold. Soldiers began to stir, checking radios, adjusting gear, and performing last-minute vehicle inspections. The convoy was scheduled to depart within the hour. 5 armored vehicles laden with medical supplies, communication arrays, and replacement equipment for the forward units. The air felt thick with tension, though most of the men and women did not know why. Inside the operations room, Alina Ramirez watched the monitors, her heart a tight knot of anticipation. Every line she had traced on the map, every pattern she had predicted, had led to this moment. She had been invisible for years, walking among soldiers without notice, yet now the fate of the convoy rested partly on her observations. Colonel Mitchell, a man whose eyes had seen too many wars, paced in front of the large map. "Drone feed," he barked at Lieutenant Harper. "Live and tracking," Harper replied, fingers flying over the keyboard. The monitor zoomed in on Black Ridge Pass, showing rocky ridges, the dry riverbed, and a narrow, twisting canyon path. Alina leaned closer. Her eyes scanned the rocks. Tiny figures shifted. Disturbed earth glinted in the morning sun, explosives being planted, precisely where she had predicted. Her stomach churned, a mix of fear and focus. "Hold the convoy," she whispered to herself, almost inaudible, but the colonel's sharp eyes caught the movement of her lips. "Hold the convoy," Colonel Mitchell repeated. "All units halt. Do not move until I give the order." Outside, soldiers readied vehicles, the rumble of engines beginning to swell. Then, an urgent series of messages crackled over the radio. The base communications team relayed that drone surveillance had identified multiple IEDs along the canyon floor and what appeared to be secondary sniper positions on the surrounding cliffs. Colonel Mitchell turned to Alina. "You were right." She said nothing. She only nodded, keeping her focus on the feed. Within minutes, the convoy commander received new orders: reroute through an alternative path, less predictable, but with its own dangers. Engineers moved forward to mark obstacles and clear minor debris. Special Forces snipers positioned themselves on nearby ridges. The entire operation now pivoted around a strategy she had quietly suggested. Her hands shook slightly as she watched. This was not a simulation. This was real. Soldiers' lives hung in balance. Each armored truck, each soldier stepping onto the path depended on timing, coordination, and the precise execution of plans. The first vehicle carefully entered the alternative route. Engines roared softly, and tires crunched over gravel. Alina held her breath. Moments later, the drone feed returned to Black Ridge Pass empty. The insurgents, their ambush thwarted, were gone, leaving only disturbed earth behind. The path she had predicted as deadly had been neutralized without a single soldier harmed. "Status," Colonel Mitchell demanded. "All clear," Harper said, voice tense but relieved. "No casualties. Convoy proceeding safely on the alternative route." Alina allowed herself the smallest exhale. Relief, bittersweet and heavy, washed over her. She had predicted the ambush, and the lives that could have been lost were intact. Yet the weight of responsibility lingered. For years she had tried to leave this world behind. Now it had found her again. The colonel called a private meeting in his office. Alina entered, hesitant. "You weren't supposed to be here," he began, voice measured. "But you saved lives today. Who are you really?" She hesitated, then gave a measured answer. "Alina Ramirez, former Defense Intelligence Analyst. I resigned after a mission went wrong. Lives were lost. I thought I'd left this world behind." He studied her carefully, his eyes sharp. "And yet you stayed in a position where you could still watch, still notice patterns. You couldn't leave it completely behind, could you?" "I tried," she said quietly. "But some instincts don't let go. Some mistakes they don't let go either." Colonel Mitchell nodded, understanding more than she expected. He wasn't the type to waste words on sentiment, but there was respect in his eyes. "You did well. Today, you were the difference." Her relief was tempered by the knowledge that victory was only partial. The enemy had adapted quickly before, and they were likely watching, learning. Her prediction had saved one convoy, but intelligence reports already hinted that the insurgents had knowledge of the original convoy schedule. Her stomach tightened. The enemy had a spy, a leak, someone inside the base, someone feeding them information. Colonel Mitchell, reading her concern, asked quietly, "You're worried about a mole?" She nodded. "If they knew the convoy's original time, they had someone here, someone with access." His face darkened. "Then we need to find them quietly. Any misstep and the next operation could cost lives. You'll help us analyze communications, patterns, anything unusual." She hesitated, then nodded again. "I can do that. I can track anomalies. It might give us a clue." Outside the operations room, soldiers returned from the alternative route. The convoy had arrived safely. The men and women who had mocked her before, who had laughed when she first warned them, now looked at her differently. Some nodded in silent gratitude. Some offered a respectful glance. She remained silent, keeping her distance, though the subtle recognition was not lost on her. As she moved back to her cleaning duties, Alina glanced one more time at the maps, the drone feeds, and the canyon. Black Ridge Pass had been neutralized today. But tomorrow would come and the enemy would adapt. The desert wind rattled the barriers and blew dust across the compound. Soldiers cleaned weapons and checked communications gear, unaware of the near disaster they had narrowly avoided. And Alina, once invisible, now knew that her past had caught up with her, that the instincts she had buried for years would never truly let her go. She set her mop against the wall and looked toward the distant canyon, pale sunlight glinting off the ridges. Somewhere out there, the enemy waited. She could feel it, a quiet hum of calculation, the deadly patience of an adversary she had yet to see. And she knew with chilling certainty that saving one convoy was only the beginning. The base seemed quieter now, but Alina Ramirez knew better. The convoy had survived, but the enemy's foreknowledge of the original schedule meant one thing. There was a leak inside forward operating base Ridgeline. Someone had betrayed the unit, feeding critical information to the insurgents. And that someone was still here. Alina sat at the communications terminal, staring at logs of incoming and outgoing transmissions. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. She hadn't been officially cleared for this type of work in months, years, really, but desperation outweighed protocol. The soldiers were alive because of her intervention, yet the danger wasn't over. If the mole struck again, the next strike would be deadlier. She started by analyzing timestamps. Normally, the logs moved in predictable sequences. Radios pinged, messages were sent and received with minimal lag. But there was an anomaly. One terminal consistently had a 2 to 3 second delay in outgoing communications. Not much, barely noticeable, but enough to be suspicious. Alina traced the IP and terminal ID. It led to the communications section, one of the most trusted areas on base. Her stomach tightened. A sergeant assigned to secure all internal communication channels had accessed convoy files repeatedly, at odd hours, always just before an ambush. Her pulse quickened. She had to be careful. Accusations of spying were lethal, and she didn't want anyone discovering that she had access to this information. Quietly, she began cross-referencing patrol reports with transmissions. Patterns emerged. Every time the sergeant handled a report, the insurgents seemed to know the convoy's path and schedule. Every slight alteration in timing was accounted for. A sudden beep from the radio broke her concentration. She glanced at the monitor, another incoming message, encrypted and suspiciously concise. She decoded it quickly, heart pounding. Coordinates, a timing schedule, references to the very convoy she had helped reroute. Her hands shook. This confirmed her worst fear. The mole wasn't just leaking information, he was orchestrating attacks. Alina leaned back, rubbing her temples. She had encountered spies before in intelligence analysis, but never in a situation like this, right under her nose, among the soldiers she had quietly observed for months. She knew she couldn't confront him directly. Not yet. If she did, he might destroy evidence or vanish before action could be taken. She needed confirmation. Slowly, she pulled up security footage, examining the communications room during the hours she had noticed the irregular activity. There, moving past cameras with practiced ease, was the sergeant. Calm, confident, seemingly unaware of scrutiny, yet each movement corresponded to transmission spikes she had already flagged. Alina's mind raced. She had to alert Colonel Mitchell without revealing her full access, otherwise suspicions might fall on her instead. She drafted a concise report: anomaly in communication logs, repeated access by one terminal, timing aligns with insurgent ambush knowledge. Nothing more. Enough to trigger an internal investigation. She delivered it discreetly. Colonel Mitchell read the report in silence, his eyes narrowing. He tapped the desk twice, motioning for Harper and two other trusted officers. Double-check everything, quietly. No alarms until we know the truth. And Alina, keep monitoring. Your instincts saved lives once. Don't let them slip again. Alina nodded, swallowing hard. The colonel's respect was reassuring, but the weight of responsibility pressed down. She had already saved a convoy. Now she had to catch a traitor before he could strike again. Over the next hours, she worked silently, watching logs, decoding messages, and triangulating movements. Each new piece of evidence further confirmed her suspicion. The mole's actions were subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, yet patterns always emerged under careful scrutiny. Then, late at night, a chilling realization hit her. The sergeant had noticed her surveillance. Someone in his position wouldn't make mistakes this small unless he had been trained to observe and adapt. If he suspected scrutiny, he might act quickly. Alina considered alerting security immediately, but she hesitated. A premature move could allow him to escape or plant false evidence. She needed certainty, a moment where the mole would be caught red-handed. Her vigilance paid off. At 2:17 hours, the sergeant accessed the terminal again, this time sending coordinates that matched a secondary ambush location. Alina recorded every movement, every keystroke, and compiled the evidence in real time. Colonel Mitchell was summoned once she had the proof. His face was grave as he examined her findings. "So he's planning another strike," he muttered. "Inside the wire, at night. He thinks he's unseen." "Yes, sir," Alina replied, voice tight with tension. "We have the location and the timing, but we need to move carefully. If he realizes we're on to him, he could disappear or accelerate his plan." The colonel nodded. "We'll assemble a team for containment and observation. No engagement until he's isolated. Alina, you'll continue monitoring. Every move, every message. Can you handle it?" "I can," she said firmly, even as adrenaline surged through her veins. Hours later, Alina sat in the shadows of the operations room, eyes glued to screens. The mole appeared again on camera, entering a restricted storage area. Her pulse quickened. He was about to retrieve additional equipment, probably for the secondary strike. She tapped her fingers against the desk, counting seconds. Then, without warning, he disappeared from view. Panic flared in her chest. Had he noticed the cameras, escaped? The risk of miscalculation clawed at her. She quickly checked terminal logs. No activity. But the security footage revealed one thing: his bunk was empty. Gone, weapon missing. Whatever he was planning next, he was already in motion. Alina's stomach tightened. She had tracked the mole, compiled evidence, and saved one convoy, but now the danger escalated. Lives were at stake again, and this time the threat came from inside the base. She leaned back, staring at the monitors. The desert night stretched endlessly beyond the base, silent but full of unseen danger. The mole was out there somewhere, and he knew more than the soldiers around him suspected. Alina clenched her fists. The cleaning lady, the invisible observer, had now become a silent guardian. She had no choice but to follow the trail, piece together the pattern, and stop him before another ambush turned into a massacre. The night was quiet, but Alina Ramirez knew better. Somewhere in the shadows, the enemy had a hand inside the base, and she would not rest until she found it. The desert night stretched endlessly across forward operating base ridgeline, a blanket of darkness pierced only by the faint glow of distant watchtower lights and the hum of generators. Inside the operations room, Alina Ramirez sat at the command terminal, her eyes scanning logs, satellite feeds, and security footage. Her mind was a tight knot of calculations, every pattern pointing to one inevitable conclusion: the mole was setting a secondary ambush. Colonel Mitchell entered silently, his boots echoing faintly on the concrete floor. "We've verified your findings," he said gravely. "He's planning another strike, a fallback ambush. Coordinates match your analysis. If we move now, we can intercept." Alina leaned forward, pointing at the screen. "There's only one path he can take. The valley narrows at 2 points, both choke points. If we place special forces there, we can contain him and neutralize the threat. He won't expect an ambush inside his ambush." Harper, the intelligence officer, frowned. "Are you suggesting we set a trap for someone who has already evaded detection once? That's risky. If we miscalculate, our men will be walking into a kill zone." Alina's eyes didn't leave the map. "I've studied his patterns. He's precise but predictable. He will take the route that gives him the most control over the ambush. He'll think he's safe because we're not directly following him." Colonel Mitchell nodded. "Prepare the team. Night operation. Containment first, engagement second. Alina, you will monitor feeds and guide the units. This is high stakes. One mistake and lives are lost." Hours later, the Special Forces team moved silently into position. The narrow valley stretched before them, flanked by steep rocky ridges. Spotlights were avoided. Drones hovered above, their infrared cameras casting the desert in black and white shadows. Every movement had to be calculated. Any noise could alert the mole. Alina monitored everything from the operations room, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Drone feeds, thermal imaging, communication logs, all converged into a single point: the enemy's approach. Her pulse raced. The mole had always been careful, but she had one advantage: she could anticipate his every step. At 2:13 hours, the first signal appeared on the feed. A shadow moved along the valley floor, crouched low, carrying what looked like an explosive device. Her breath caught. "He's on the move," she whispered. Harper repeated her words over comms to the team in the valley. The soldiers waited silently, hearts pounding beneath their armor. Alina's voice guided them in precise whispers. "Left ridge. Move to cover. He will approach the choke point in 3 minutes. Hold position until he's fully committed." The mole stepped into the narrow canyon. The Special Forces team tensed. Every sniper, every marksman, every soldier held their fire, waiting for the exact moment. Then came the flash. Gunfire erupted, sudden and controlled. The mole's attempt to trigger the ambush was intercepted immediately. Explosives detonated harmlessly at a distance, designed to draw attention, but the team had already predicted it. Shots rang out across the canyon, ricocheting off the rocks. The mole dove for cover, his face partially illuminated by muzzle flashes. Alina's hands flew over the keyboard, relaying updates. Move to the secondary ridge. He's repositioning. Watch the left flank. He'll attempt to escape that way. The soldiers advanced cautiously, covering every possible exit. The mole scrambled over rocks, trying to find an advantage, but every move was anticipated. Alina's voice guided them like a ghostly presence. He's slowing, approaching the dead end. Prepare for containment. Minutes stretched like hours. Then silence fell, thick and heavy. Alina held her breath, staring at the thermal feed. The mole was pinned, nowhere to go. A final burst of movement and special forces converged, subduing him quickly. Target secured, one of the team leaders reported over comms. Relief flooded through the operations room. Alina leaned back, her hands trembling. The mole had been stopped. Lives had been saved again, thanks to her analysis and predictions. Colonel Mitchell entered, face stern but relieved. You did it. You saved lives tonight. You predicted his every move. His voice was calm, but there was unmistakable respect. Not many could have done what you just did. Alina exhaled slowly. It was precise. He left a trail, I just followed it. Harper shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe a cleaning lady tracked a trained mole, predicted his moves, and guided a counterambush in real time. Alina didn't respond. She simply returned her gaze to the map, ensuring no detail was overlooked. The mole had been contained, but the operation revealed a chilling truth. Even inside the base, danger could strike from the most unexpected places. Later, as soldiers returned to their bunks and vehicles, the base seemed quiet again, but Alina knew better. The desert night was never truly silent. Somewhere, insurgents were learning, watching, adapting. The mole might be in custody, but the threat of ambush would never fully vanish. Alina stood at the operations terminal, exhausted yet alert. She reflected on the events, the convoy saved, the mole captured, the ambush neutralized. But she knew this wasn't the end. The patterns she had traced and the instincts she had relied upon were the only things keeping the soldiers alive. She had once tried to leave this world behind. Now it had pulled her back in, and she realized there was no escaping it. Her eyes flicked to the canyon one last time, visible faintly in the moonlight beyond the base perimeter. Black Ridge Pass had been neutralized, the secondary ambush foiled, but the desert was full of surprises. Tomorrow could bring another threat, another pattern to decipher, another life to save. Alina Ramirez had once been invisible, ignored, dismissed. Now, in the quiet hum of monitors and drones, she was the invisible hand guiding the safety of soldiers she barely knew, but whose lives depended entirely on her insight. And though the night was over, she knew she could never rest. She would watch, predict, and protect because the desert never forgot, and neither did she. Morning light filtered weakly through the dusty windows of forward operating base Ridgeline, painting the operations room in muted gold. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but subdued. Soldiers sat in small groups, cleaning weapons, checking radios, and exchanging quiet words about the night's events. The ambush had been foiled, the mole captured, and the base remained intact. But the mood was heavy, weighed down by the realization of how close they had come to disaster. Alina Ramirez remained near the Central Command terminal, eyes flicking between maps, reports, and satellite feeds. She had guided the counter-trap, predicted the mole's every move, and watched as special forces executed the operation with precision. Yet even now, she felt no triumph. Only a deep, quiet relief, and the heavy sense of responsibility that came with knowing just how fragile the line between life and death could be. Colonel Mitchell entered the room, followed by Lieutenant Harper and a few other officers. His face was stern, but there was an unmistakable softness around his eyes, a look of recognition and gratitude. "Let's review," he said, voice calm but carrying weight. "I want everything on the table: mole's movements, communications, ambush locations, and how this was prevented." Alina stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. She explained the mole's access to communications, the delayed transmissions she had noticed, the timing patterns that pointed directly to him. Each detail she recounted drew sharper attention from the officers, who scribbled notes and cross-referenced logs in real time. "You saw all of this," Colonel Mitchell said finally, his tone edged with disbelief. "And you didn't just notice it, you predicted it. You guided the operation." Alina nodded quietly. "I only followed the patterns. The mole left traces in the logs, his movements were predictable. It wasn't intuition, it was analysis." A lieutenant who had once laughed at her earlier now leaned forward, voice low with a mix of awe and guilt. We underestimated you. We thought you just cleaned floors." She gave a tight smile. "I was invisible, that made it easier to observe." The colonel, his eyes fixed on her, shook his head slightly. "This is unprecedented. Normally, detection and interdiction take days, sometimes weeks. You identified and neutralized the threat in hours. You saved lives that we couldn't even quantify." Outside, soldiers went about routine duties, unaware of the calculations and strategy that had unfolded within the operations room. But inside, Alina felt the weight of eyes finally seeing her for what she was, not just a cleaner, not just an observer, but a trained analyst who had walked back into a battlefield she thought she'd left behind. The captured mole was brought into the operations room under heavy guard. His eyes darted around nervously, the reality of failure settling in. Colonel Mitchell addressed the team, voice steady and commanding. "This man compromised our operations. He tried to orchestrate ambushes that would have cost dozens of lives. Thanks to swift action and correct intelligence, no one was lost. He will be held accountable." The mole glared at Alina, realizing, perhaps too late, that the quiet woman who had walked past him countless times had been the one orchestrating his defeat. There was recognition in his eyes, fear, and perhaps a grudging respect for her foresight. Soldiers murmured among themselves, the tension of the previous night slowly giving way to comprehension and gratitude. Alina's role could no longer be ignored. She had acted decisively, intelligently, and effectively, changing the course of events without firing a single shot. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer. "Alina Ramirez, your work today has proven invaluable. You identified a pattern we missed, tracked a mole, and helped save lives. You will be formally acknowledged for your contribution." She felt a flush of something unfamiliar, recognition, yes, but also the faint sting of unease. She had spent years hiding, trying to escape the responsibility that came with knowing patterns, predicting threats. And yet, in this desert outpost, she had been pulled back in. "Yes, sir," she said simply, voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Lieutenant Harper approached, shaking his head. "I can't believe this. You didn't even have clearance for half of this, and yet you were right every step of the way. How did you do it?" Alina glanced at the map again, eyes scanning the faint lines marking previous ambushes. "I paid attention," she said softly, "and I remembered what the patterns meant. Sometimes the answer is in the details that everyone else overlooks." The colonel nodded, acknowledging both her humility and her brilliance. "From now on, you will not be invisible. You will work with the intelligence team. Your skills are too valuable to be ignored." For a moment, Alina allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in years, a sense of belonging. She had been invisible, overlooked, dismissed. But now, in the quiet aftermath of chaos, she was seen. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the day progressed, soldiers processed the events of the night. They spoke quietly among themselves about the ambush that never happened, the mole that was caught, and the strange, almost mythical figure who had guided the operation from behind the scenes. Alina remained at her station, scanning the monitors, but she noticed the subtle gestures of acknowledgement, a nod here, a whispered thank you there. Outside, the desert sun rose higher, glinting off the armored vehicles and the rocky ridges beyond the base. The danger of the past night lingered in the heat, but it had been contained. Black Ridge Pass and the secondary ambush sites were no longer threats, at least for now. Alina Ramirez, once invisible, had become indispensable, and yet she knew the desert would not remain quiet for long. The patterns she had tracked, the instincts she relied upon, were still necessary. Somewhere out there, beyond the wire, another threat was forming, waiting for its chance. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of reprieve. The mole was captured, the ambushes thwarted, and the lives of countless soldiers had been preserved. She had faced her past, and in doing so, had rewritten a future that could have ended in tragedy. Colonel Mitchell placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Rest," he said. "You've earned it." Alina nodded, allowing herself a small, weary smile. She stepped to the window and looked out across the desert, the wind kicking up dust around the perimeter. The mission was not over, the war was not over, but for today she had made a difference. And in a world where being invisible had once been her armor, she finally understood the power of being seen.